it's kind of like if it happened 2,000 years ago, it was God. If it happens now, it's demonic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of drilled into a lot of Christians' minds that anything supernatural must be evil. Um, and well, especially I grew up around a lot of Southern Baptists, and it was almost as if they were afraid of anything supernatural.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Brewery Ministries podcast. I am sitting here with Evan Rada. He is a hypnotist and a very cool guy. I met him at our brewery group that meets to discuss theology over beer. So I thought we'd get together and we would talk a little bit about some questions, maybe some things we talk about in our brewery discussions. And since he's into hypnotism and he's interested in the supernatural, I thought, let's talk about his perspective on some of the supernatural events in the Bible and in life. So, Evan, how do you explain what's your perspective on supernatural events in the Bible? Because I thought you might have a unique flavor being a hypnotist.
Well, from my personal perspective, when I look at a lot of the events in the Bible, they seem to almost mirror teachings that you'll find in other faiths, mostly Hindu and Buddhist. They have some miracles that are similar. And I've also found certain teachings within things like Christian mysticism and the Kabbalah and various New Age practices that the way they word things sounds very similar to what I've seen in the Bible over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Not to turn the show into Coast to Coast AM, but I've someone that my background. I was raised around magicians, so I knew all the illusions, and I know a lot of the psychic tricks. So to me, it was very difficult to be convinced of some of these phenomena. But over the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, a lot of these really strange occurrences have become more of a reality as I've studied a lot more and sort of delved into some of that world.
Interesting. Yeah, say more about that.
Well, what I found was, so in high school, I began studying miracles, specifically in the Bible. And the common theme that I found was that nearly everybody that performed miracles was either mentored by somebody or was teaching somebody. So the question I began to ask was, what is this process that these prophets and these apostles and people are doing to be able to perform these? Because my interest was finding a way to bring it back to the church. And oddly enough, hypnosis sort of became almost the stage one of learning about how a lot of that stuff works. Because I came to find that a lot of it has to do with how your mind sort of affects everything around you. And when you look in scripture, you see a lot of, especially Jesus, but a lot of people discussing the idea of cleansing your mind so that your outward life starts to appear different. So removing doubt, faith the size of a mustard seed, all, and after having about a lifetime of that, a short lifetime, about 18 or 19 years old, I found some books on this thing called the Law of Attraction. And a lot of those early books that were written either quoted or mirrored a lot of Christ's teachings. So I started peeling the onion from there. And I guess you could say God sort of put me on this journey of rediscovering all these old ideas that I think the early church knew about.
Interesting. Yeah, that reminds me of like how all these old religions had a flood story. And so if they all also had some kind of miracles or something, that almost brings some validity to the subject. And I think it's interesting because even in the Bible, you actually see people from other religions performing miracles. Like sorcerers are mentioned and things like that. And they could replicate Moses's miracles or maybe even some of the things Jesus did. That is interesting to me. Like, what do you think is going on? Where does that come from?
I think the modern terminology would be quantum physics. It was, of course, discussed as magic back then. And what's interesting is the Bible doesn't discount the existence of these people. You know, in Sunday school, you're taught that what Pharaoh's magicians were doing wasn't real, but the Bible doesn't say that.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
And a theory that, you know, what people don't realize about Moses, he's one of, there's a huge gap in history where it appears that the supernatural for the Hebrews, those kinds of things sort of went away for a while. And then you bring Moses into the picture. And Moses is an interesting figure because he's the son of a Pharaoh. And being the son of a Pharaoh, you would have gone through these Egyptian mystic schools that existed at the time. And then of course from Moses you have all these prophets that come later. And he doesn't act all that surprised when he sees a lot of the supernatural things happening around him later in his life.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm not trying to get into heresy, but that's a theory that I found very interesting when I just looked at. Well, he knows he knows all their tricks. You know, he's going shot for shot with them in the beginning. He outclasses them entirely.
Yeah, and we can almost see maybe a distinction there, like you mentioned. Like you don't want to get into heresy or something. I think what you're talking about is more like gravity, like studying like how gravity works or magnetism, quantum physics. So some people maybe like there's a school of thought where you can learn magic from like evil spirits or something, right? Because that's something that they were doing in ancient times, especially in Egypt. So there's that kind of source for this kind of thing. But then there's also natural laws that maybe we don't totally understand. Is that kind of the distinction that you're drawing there?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting into is there's just sort of this idea that, you know, there are universal laws, and with the right kind of knowledge you're able to sort of use these laws to your advantage. Is kind of that's the going theory if you look into a lot of these different schools of, you know, black magic and different things, and you see the same types of rituals going all the way back to ancient civilizations. Even what they're doing now it's just repeating the same thing. And you know, when you look at the good guys in the Bible, they still appear to be channeling something, but it's this sort of, I guess, you know, this good energy, this, you know, force that they're able to use in the name of God. They're able to, you know, call down fire and walk on water, and we're taught almost to believe that it's spontaneous, that people just start doing this stuff out of the blue. But when you change it to, oh no, people are being taught how to do this, then you can work with, okay, so there's two different sort of universal forces that we as humans don't quite understand, you know, but they're out there and people are using them, you know, throughout ancient history.
So there's like good sources or bad sources. that could be channeled to do something like that.
That's the theory, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I always thought it was interesting because for me, like I've always struggled with the miracles in the Bible. I eventually stopped struggling with them so much when I thought, well, if there's a God that can create matter and do all this other stuff, then okay, so surely he can do miracles or help people to do miracles. But I've always kind of struggled a little bit with them because I just, haven't necessarily seen them. And I think maybe that's common. The hardest part for me was like those guys in the New Testament, they seemed like they knew they could go up to someone and heal them. And that's the thing that like I'm like, oh, I don't know that I would ever be able to do that,
Yeah.
Just wonder how they did it.
Yeah. My theory right now was it was similar to what we now call Reiki. Because the practice, the way they describe it is so similar to what happens in the Bible, where if you practice Reiki, you're not the one healing people. You're just sort of a vessel. So you walk up to someone and you get yourself out of the way and it just moves through you. In the Bible, they mention healing through God. In China, they have something called Qigong healing. And they do the same thing. They step out of the way. They let this divine source move through them and heal people. And I've seen some really crazy things come out of those practices. I've heard some really odd stories.
Yeah, when you put it that way, that does, kind of sound like what Peter was doing and things like that, because he's channeling God, he's getting out of the way. It's not really Peter doing the healing. That is really interesting. So what kind of things have you seen?
About a year ago, I actually went through a Reiki training. And I was with a very good instructor. It goes by David Snyder. And we were in Vegas, and he starts talking about it. He goes, when you do this practice, you can do it from a distance. It's non-local. Basically meaning you could do this with anyone, any place on the planet is sort of what he's getting at. I'm thinking, well, this is really far-fetched. So I decided I'm going to try to break this practice because people were reacting to the process as I was doing it. And I was seeing back pain go away and emotional responses and things. So I decided to take a blind test. And I picked 5 people. I just drew 5 stick figures on a sheet of paper. And they're walking around the seminar doing their own thing, their own practice, practicing. And so I went and did the process, over the sheet of paper. And I went and interviewed them. All 5 of them had felt something spontaneous happen to them. So that was when I went from being a total skeptic to starting to believe some of this stuff. I've heard stories of people that have gone through very similar things, and they've had illnesses just disappear. I'm not one for quitting the treatment that your doctor is giving you. If you want to go to one of these people, but those are just the kind of anecdotal stories that I've been hearing the last couple of years. And it's really started to amaze me. Even medical doctors have been in some of the classes I've been to, which is what intrigued me the most.
Yeah, so this is something that like Americans probably struggle with, but it is more common in other countries. And I actually came across a paper from a doctor recently. See if I can dig this up sometime, but it was a couple years old. And this guy was saying something like the human cells are basically like crystalline or something, and your thought process has an effect on whether or not the cells can regenerate and heal and things like that. So I do know that like your thoughts can have an effect on your own brain on which pathways are growing, the amygdala, the anger center, or the love and empathy center. So whatever you think about has a chemical effect on the brain that actually changes the pathways. So taking that a step further, it can actually slow down or speed up your own healing process depending on how you've trained your mind, what you're setting your thoughts on. And another doctor, boy, I wish I could remember who this was. He's a neurosurgeon, might be Timothy Jennings. He talked about that, how people who like meditated on scriptures about God's love, their compassion and love center of their brain really grew. And there were other people who like they struggled with anger. Their amygdala was growing, and those two circuits counteract each other. So they were saying, well, you can actually meditate on love and on God's love and scriptures about that, and actually heal that part of your brain. I always thought that was really interesting. Haven't tried it myself, but I should
Yeah.
because I would like to figure out how to deal with stress better. I'm sure most people would.
Yeah. Well, another interesting thing is uh, there was a study that came out, and this is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not causation, it's correlation. So some medical doctors were noticing that certain types of cancers were linked to certain types of negative emotions, or the people tended to have these emotions more, develop these certain cancers. Um, and I think anger was leukemia, or depression was leukemia, anger was bone cancer. I don't remember what lung cancer was, but um, that's something that they've been talking about forever in a lot of Chinese medicine, is emotional health and how it affects your physical health.
Interesting.
And you go back, the Bible talks about being able to control your emotions, and so it's sort of exciting to me to be able to look at the Bible and say, yeah, there's all this biblical truth on actually healing people physically, but it's sort of, I guess, hidden between the lines, because in the modern era where we've become so scientific that something like that is it's so far outside the realm of what our perceived reality would be that it's hard to comprehend that something like that would work.
Well, yeah, in that study, and that goes along with the Timothy Jennings study, basically there is a natural process underneath that. It's just something that we didn't know about. There's some relationship between our thoughts and brain chemistry and then the body and its natural process. That's like discovering gravity or quantum physics. Didn't see it before, but it's there. And that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's blown me away over the years. I've been sort of under this current school of study the past, I'd say 8 or 9 years, and I never dreamed that I would discover that hypnosis can increase your recovery rate for things like cancer or ALS, or it's the things people have come to me and told me that have been at the different hypnosis events I've been to, have really blown me away.
Wow.
And as simple as the processes are too, that people are doing, that are causing these big shifts to happen.
Does that have something to do with getting the brain into a relaxed state where it can heal or focus on something?
More than likely, yeah. It would almost have to do with the chemicals you're brain is releasing.
Yeah.
But I'm finding more and more truth to a lot of the energetic practices that are out there. There's too many things that are turning out to be true that shouldn't be. Is kind of how I look at it. And I don't entirely believe it. I just see it. That's kind of how I word it with people.
Interesting. So you're like a skeptic in the field.
Yeah.
Like you have a fascination with it, but you're still skeptical.
Yeah, it's some of it I know how to do, and I still go, this shouldn't be working. Well, it's, the law of attraction is something that shouldn't work, because it's there's a lot of meditation and sort of getting your mind worked into a certain result. And you would think that just having something in your mind wouldn't cause things to sort of manifest outside of yourself. And then again, I've had weird stuff with that. My first time with law of attraction, I had just paid rent and I was short about $25, so I need to buy food for the week. So I decided, okay, well, I'll try this meditation thing out. I do this meditation. I go to work and I'm walking out the back door at the end of my shift, and I look down and there was $5 bills fanned out, just sitting on the sidewalk. And that kind of sparked me into trying to figure out, like, what the heck was Jesus doing when he was calling forth all this stuff that. So that was, looking back, I think that was the seed that got me started.
Huh. That is interesting.
That one little thing, I was like, there's some truth to all this stuff,
Interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective on that stuff. I think that's cool. That's different. I think it's going to be a new perspective for a lot of people. So that's interesting to think about things that way. Thanks for watching. We're going to pause this interview right here and hit subscribe if you enjoyed this. Hit the notification bell. We're going to pick up with part 2 of our interview with Evan Rada next time. If you really want to know more about Brewery Ministries and what we're doing to help people explore faith in coffee shops, in homes, and in breweries and online, head on over to breweryministries.org and sign up for the email newsletter there. We will see you again soon.